Change Your POV podcast is about building confidence in your own beliefs, morals, and opinions while challenging yourself to be open, humble, and curious about things that you are unfamiliar with, don't have experience in, or straight up disagree with.
We will explore concepts and ideas that will challenge you physically, mentally, and spiritually. Personal introspection is among the greatest skill sets you will learn to hone. The foundation of your success is rooted in trust, gratitude, and forgiveness.
So join us as we explore things that we are unfamiliar with, strengthen things that we are, and are always challenging ourselves to become better.
Change Your POV podcast, where perspective is the vantage point of success.
Part 2 of the book we are now in of Extreme Ownership by, excuse me, I got to clear the throat this morning, by U.S. Navy SEALs, Jocko Willink, Leif Babin. We've already covered chapters 1 and 2, 3 and 4. We are now on 5 and 6, which falls within part 2. So today we're going to be talking about chapter 5, Cover and Move, and number 6, Prioritize and Execute. So I'm going to be doing the first part, Cover and Move, and then Bennett, you're going to cover down on Prioritize and Execute. So it's kind of nice because, like I mentioned last week, this is also the book that we're doing the book club at my work, right? And we're following along. The same chapters that we're talking about is also the chapters that we're discussing at work. So it's interesting. So I think what I'll do next week, or on our next recording when we're covering the next 2 chapters, is I think what would be kind of cool to do is I'll bring in to our conversation some of the feedback that I received from my team about what they thought of some of these chapters.
What chapters did you say we're doing today?
We're doing 5 and 6. Cover and Move.
And, yes.
And,
okay.
Yep. Actually, no, sorry. It's 6 is Simple. My bad.
Simple, right.
Yeah, you're like, what?
5 is I'm like, wait a minute. That's like Saturday.
Yeah.
We'll record that shit on Saturday. And that is episode 8 and 9.
All
or
right.
7 and 8.
Yes.
Is that right? 7 and 8. Yeah.
I jumped ahead on a chapter. So we're doing 5 and 6, Cover and Move, and Simple.
Simple.
Yeah. That's the simplest.
But see,
name
obviously,
for a
but
chapter.
it ain't fucking easy.
Right, but they could have thought of a simpler name for that chapter.
right. Just S.
Just S. You figure it out.
S. You
Simple.
figure that shit out.
Yeah, man. So
I always thought keep it simple. Kiss.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Considering we're in the military, mind frame with this.
Yeah,
that's something that's said constantly. So
yeah.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Very much like last week. I'll just kind of give you a little bit of background, then I'll read from the book, and then we'll talk about the principles.
Yeah.
And see what you think about that, right? That's how we do it. So Leif Babin is out on patrol, out on mission in Ramadi, Iraq. And
South Central Ramadi.
South Central Ramadi. And he's actually conducting operations from a COP, a COP, or Combat Outpost, which is different than a FOB. And for those that are listening, I'll explain the difference. So FOB, a Forward Operating Base, is what I was based out of when I was there. And it was essentially, the FOBs are much larger, so there's a lot more people, a lot more infrastructure, a lot more support, right? So in my FOB, it wasn't big, like area-wise, by any stretch, but it was a bit more fortified, right? It had 10-foot high walls. There was guard towers all around the perimeter, and we had our troop was there, our Charlie Troop 10th Cav Brigade Reconnaissance Troop was there. Also, the entire engineering battalion was also there, and then there were some pockets of support people, maintenance people, medics, etc. A COP, or Combat Outpost, that's like when you go kind of out into the
out into the wilderness,
into the thick of things, and you go out into the enemy stronghold, and you search. What is the actual? There's an acronym for it. Search, secure, hold. Search, clear, hold. Anyway, they go out into the bad guy territory, out into.
And what does COP stand for?
Combat outpost.
Yes.
And so they go out and they clear an area. It could be a building, could be a couple of buildings. It's not very big, not very much. And they basically clear it, and then they set a defensive position, and then they operate from there out into, the city. And so you got a lot of smaller COPs or combat outposts that kind of sprinkled around. And that's the way that they are able to secure ground and then keep the ground and then move forward. Secure the ground, keep the ground. Because the concept of a fob, it's if you got an area you're trying to rid of the enemy and you're launching from a fob, but you come back to the fob, then when you're out on patrol, you're pushing the enemy back. But then when you come back to the fob, the enemy just flood back into the area that you'd already cleared, right? So it's a constant, perpetual, giving and taking of territory. And yes, you have the opportunity of killing the enemy, and basically it becomes a battle of attrition. What they wanted to do is actually clear Ramadi totally of insurgent activity. So in order to do that, you've got to launch into these combat outposts, secure those little areas, launch patrols from there, move forward a little bit more. It's very similar to how a football team will move down the field. Like when I used to coach football, we used to tell our boys, how do you win a football game? And initially the boys were like, you score points, put points on the board. That's how I'm like, yeah, that's how you get points. Ultimately, whoever has the highest number of points wins the game. I said, but how do you win the game? How do you ensure that you get points on the board? And, there's a lot of really good answers. Some of the boys are like, well, you got to make sure you don't fumble the ball, turnovers, things like that. Yes. But really, the answer, and I knew they didn't have the answer. It was more of a rhetorical question, but I wanted to kind of give them the answer. And I said, okay, the way you can ensure that you are actually putting points on the board is every single, you get 4 downs before you got to turn the ball over. But if you can achieve 3 yards a down, that's all you need. 3 yards, 3 yards, 3 yards, first down. 3 yards, 3 yards, 3 yards, first down. And if you can achieve 3 yards every single play, then you give yourself the best chance of putting points on the board, right? Now, obviously, you got to do a good job defending the ball when you don't have it. But when you're on offense, all you got to, everyone, like the kids, they want the 20-yard pass, and they want the 80-yard run. And those are cool to watch, and they're fun, don't get me wrong. But when you're getting right down to the brass tacks of the mechanics of the game, that 3 yards is all you need, right? And that's really essentially what a combat outpost is. It's gaining those 3 yards, setting up the ball for the next down. Gaining your 3 yards, setting the ball up for the next, and eventually you're pushing the opposite team or the bad guys back into their own end zone, and then you score, right? And that's essentially how they were able to eventually clear Ramadi of insurgent activity. So that's kind of like in a nutshell what's going on here. So they're launching some patrols and some overwatch positions from this combat outpost Falcon in south central Ramadi. And they end up taking some pretty substantial enemy contact, and they need to pull back. They need to kind of pull back into another Overwatch position, or kind of get out of there and find their way back to the higher headquarters, back to the larger element. And they were debating on whether or not to call in the Bradleys, to come kind of exfil them. But they decided instead of doing that, they were just going to move out of their current position and do what's called bounding Overwatch, or bounding movements. So if you got a team of 3 or 4 guys, you got a couple people that will lay suppressive fire, while the other elements will pull back. And then once they get set, then they start with covering fire, and then so you leapfrog. You're basically leapfrogging back, that activity is called covering and move. You're covering one element while they move, and then they set, and then you just keep doing that, vice versa, all the way back. So that's kind of where we are, and then I'll just pick it up in the book. So they made they agreed the LPO. I guess that stands for leading petty officer. So
it's a lead petty officer.
Yeah, so
usually
Leif,
a chief or a chief of some sort.
Right. So Leif Babin kind of talks to his LPO or leading petty officer about the plan, and in Army terms, and maybe even, I don't know, you could correct me, but in Marine Corps terms, this would be equivalent to like the platoon sergeant.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Right.
Or first sergeant, depends on, again, it's all hierarchy and chain of command,
Right. Yeah. I don't know the actual ranks from a Navy standpoint.
Right? Chief petty officer.
Yeah. What's the rank though?
Is an E7.
Okay.
Chief petty officer. Then you have senior chief petty officer.
Yeah.
And then you have master chief, which is this equivalent to a sergeant major. And there's master chiefs and command master chiefs too. So it's very similar to the Army. It's just, it's the same ranks.
Yeah.
And same responsibilities, just different billets, obviously, or the billets are the same. That's what I meant to say. The billets are the same, but the names are different.
So senior chief, that would be like a first sergeant, right?
A senior chief is an E8.
Okay, right. So it sounds to me like in the Army, at the platoon level, you've got an O1 or O2 as the platoon leader with an E7 platoon sergeant. But in the teams, it sounds like there's a O3 platoon leader, platoon commander, and a E8 platoon sergeant, basically. Right?
Well, I mean, all right. So the reason that this is the way it is because of it's the nature of special operations.
Oh yeah, I get it. I'm just trying to see if I'm correct in saying that.
Yes,
right.
Pretty much. I mean, but it's like anything else. It gets backfilled by acting people.
Absolutely, sure.
And sometimes you might have a chief, but you might at some points, lead petty officer might only be in E6.
Oh, okay.
So it'd be like a senior, petty officer 6.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you just don't. Petty officer, the rank petty officer starts at E4.
Okay, so petty officers
you've
still
got petty
lower.
PO4s, PO5s, PO6s, and then you've got chief petty officers from E7 to E9.
So where does their NCO rank start?
4. E4. Same like us. The Army is a little different unless you're a corporal.
Right.
Then technically you're an NCO, but, the Army's got that sham shield specialist. So, but everyone, in the Navy, you're a petty officer as of, which is an NCO as of E4.
So
whether you're actually doing an NCO job at that point, who knows? But
yeah, I always find it interesting to compare and contrast the military ranks, and it's weird because even though I did 10 years in the Army, I still know very little about a lot of the other branches, and I find that's
I mean, why that's your wheelhouse. The only reason I have any knowledge is because I spent time in the Marines, spent time in the Army. Their rank structure is exactly the same,
right?
But the billets are a little different, just because of I mean, I don't need to go into it, but it's basically you can take one step down for the Marine Corps. So like a platoon sergeant in the Army, by design, a platoon sergeant in the Army is an E7, right? So that's like what the org chart says that it should be a sergeant first class.
Right.
Most of the time it's a staff sergeant, but a lot of times it's a sergeant first class, right? It's supposed to be. Now, in the Marine Corps, the org chart says that a platoon sergeant is an E6.
Right.
Right. So,
and I think a lot of that is because the rank structure is pushed down a little bit further because you guys have that solid E4 NCO rank.
Yes,
Whereas,
that's part of it,
right.
and I think it has to do with size of force.
Oh, that's true. I didn't even consider
the
that.
Marine
You're
Corps.
right.
It's like no one acknowledges really ever that the Marine Corps is like a tenth of the size, literally a tenth of the size of the Army.
Right.
So it's like I love how people are like Army Marines, like they always compete. Well, there really isn't a competition at all.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Because the Marine Corps is tiny.
Yeah.
It's like the size of literally the size of a corps.
Right.
Maybe a little bit. It is bigger than a regular corps because we have an air wing. That's the only difference, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But an Army Corps, like 18th Airborne Corps, is huge.
Right.
18th Airborne Corps is the size of the whole Marine Corps almost.
That's
so
crazy.
People have to think about it in those things. Is the Marine Corps has a very specific mission that they fill. I mean, they don't. They've expanded that mission since, but that's the big difference. We're going off on a tangent here, but it's a little bit of an education, right?
Yeah.
And even our Navy isn't that big.
Right.
When it comes down to it. Now, in comparison, boat-wise, like actual ships-wise, it's the biggest in the world.
But it's still much smaller than it used to be.
But it's still much smaller than it used to be. Holy hell is it smaller than it used to be. Right. So, but as it goes, our forces, and our Air Force is really small too. I mean, in overall, if you look at other countries, our forces, there's countries with a lot more people, but we make up for that with technology, right?
That's to offset quantity, you introduce quality, right?
Yeah,
and higher quality
and
than
arguably, the American fighting person is one of the best in the world. I mean, there's all these different. You can fight about it. Like the British are badass dudes, like the British infantry, like Army or
unless it's
British
tea
Royal
time.
Marines.
Unless it's tea time, bro. It's
right.
Time to they got to take a break.
Chill out. Like they're badass. Each country has their amazing units, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've had the fortunate opportunity to work with a lot of them, and from Israeli Defense Forces to, Uzbek freaking army, which, anyway.
Uzbek has an army?
Yeah, Uzbekistan.
I didn't even know they had an
but
army.
but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's you literally just have to look at it, and there's different ilks and race, colors, creeds, and effectiveness.
Yeah.
And we're pretty fucking effective.
And given the size of the Marine Corps, that obviously has to translate to promotion's got to be harder too.
It depends on MOS, right? I mean, just like in the Army.
Really?
You have certain to get promoted to at certain ranks. There's bottlenecks.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, every MOS, every military designator has their bottlenecks. What rank that is, who knows?
Yeah.
The Marine Corps, most MOSs, the bottleneck, frankly, is gunny.
Okay. E7.
But once you get to a certain rank, whether you're enlisted or officer, you're what would we call it what would they call it in the Army? Their corps, their
branch.
Their branch, that's it.
Yeah.
Their branch doesn't matter. So you might have a sergeant major in a infantry battalion that might have spent most of his time in a commo battalion.
Right.
So it's the wants and needs of the Marine Corps. And they spread load their leadership that way a little bit. So, yeah.
And I know, like in the Army, I know a lot of officers that will actually change their branch in order to avoid that bottleneck.
Yes.
And you know what I mean? Go in to do, yeah. Yep.
Yep. Yeah. So, like, I've seen, I remember a few years back, I had a friend that went from, he was totally bottlenecked in infantry. Like, he had made it to captain and could not get past captain, like, to make major. Mm-hmm. Plus, he didn't want to do the staff time as badly after he had come out, because he had done a ton of staff time as a lieutenant. Mm-hmm. But then he was going back to staff. So he went aviation.
Okay.
And it was like a different animal. So, I mean, because in aviation, he got to fly. That's what it came. Right. Especially at the time. It's like, this is like 2006, 2007. So he's flying out all the time. So,
and that's the one part about the Army I never really fully understood, and I still don't today. And that's the warrant officer piece of things.
Yeah.
I was always baffled by that.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, we could definitely talk about that later, but because I just realized that one of our good buddies, I don't know, should we call him out on the show? We could definitely do that. Another fellow podcaster, Code of Character.
Oh yeah,
I didn't realize he was a chief warrant officer.
Right,
and he just got promoted to his CW 3 or 4 recently.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
I got to talk to him.
Yeah, we're going to have to talk to him. Maybe get him on the show.
Yeah.
I don't want to call him out by name because,
that's fine.
But anyway, back to the book. Leif is communicated to what we just at length, at nauseum described essentially his platoon sergeant.
his lead enlisted person.
Right, his LPO. And he says, yeah, let's do this, was the consensus. Everybody knew we would likely get in a gunfight because, here they are. They got to pull back. They decided against calling in a larger coalition force to, with Bradleys and tanks to extract them. But we wanted that gunfight to be on our own terms, not the enemy's. With everything ready, we broke out of the building and emerged onto the street, our weapons pointed in all directions, ready for a fight. We quickly moved out and made our way through the streets, covering and moving, as a team past Iraqi civilians who stared at us with some surprise. When aggressive men with guns pointed their weapons at them, the locals knew to keep their distance. Anyone who didn't avoid interfering with a heavily armed SEAL squad was certainly looking for trouble. Rapidly, we pushed past parked cars and piles of trash. Threats were everywhere in this urban environment. Every gate, door, and alleyway that we passed, the distant intersections down the street at ground level, and above us from every rooftop, balcony, and upstairs window, each presented the possibility of well-armed Muj fighters ready to inflict horror wounds or death upon us. Our tactic, which we had trained for, practiced, and utilized, was a formational one we called cover and move, hence the name of the chapter. Within our OP2 squad, we had 4 elements of smaller teams. One team covered, the other weapon trained on threats, while the other teams moved. Then those teams reversed roles. In this way, the teams leapfrogged in bounds, consistently utilizing cover and move to ensure that we were prepared to fend off attacks as we maneuvered through the streets. For about 5, and that's the thing, is you could do this cover and move in any direction. You can do it forward or back, and you can do it laterally side to side. So a lot of people don't get the impression that a cover and move is a retreating maneuver. It isn't. You can use this cover and move to move in any direction.
Well, it's just the safest way to travel.
It absolutely is. Yep.
I mean, bottom line, you know, and you can cover and move in vehicles. You can cover and move.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, we trained
That's
to do all that shit.
Yeah, we did that. We did that in our Humvees and on our patrols quite a bit. So that's a good point.
Why the fuck wouldn't you? I mean, it's dumb not to, especially in an urban environment. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Because that's the thing. Like, there's violence of action and swift movement, right? So you need some of that at certain times, but there's other times that it's about moving. So stay moving, but you've got to move under cover. That's the whole point, right? Cover and move, cover and move, and you can do that. Well, we'll get into the rest. So keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think the interesting thing about cover and move is for hunters out there, if you're walking through the woods, it's harder to spot something that's moving, because as you're walking, everything around you, your entire peripheral vision in front of you, everything is moving, right? Trees are passing other trees, things are coming into focus, things are going out of focus. So as you're moving,
let alone you're trying to safely traverse the terrain,
right,
without falling on your ass.
Yeah, so your mind is occupied, right?
But and when you're constantly looking down, looking up, looking down, looking up. So it's you can't see everything. So that's why you have that cover element to have eyes on the terrain you're walking through. Period.
Because when you're stationary, if you're a hunter and you're stationary, nothing else around you is moving except for that animal. So you could pick up movement much quicker and faster. And not only that, but your mind is focused for that very reason, because you're not looking at where you're stepping next or stepping over that log or looking up, looking down. You could focus on what's out in front of you. So that's really kind of the essence of cover and move, is because while you're moving, it's just harder. It's just harder to spot a threat when you're on the move versus when you're stationary and observing for threats. So you have one element that's stationary, observing threats, that can see it much better than you can if you're moving. The other element's moving, and then you get into position, you set up, and then once the prior element that was moving is set and stationary, right, then the other element picks up and moves, and you just keep doing that leapfrog effect all the way back.
Absolutely.
All right, so for about 500 meters, OP2 moved along steadily, making our way back toward COP Falcon, which is, again, combat outpost. Then all hell broke loose. Fully automatic gunfire erupted from the rear of the patrol. And again, from the rear of the patrol. And this is something I have to point out, right? A lot of people, when they think about combat and they think about war, they think about, like, you've got like the forward line, and you've got rear echelon, and then you clearly know where the direction that the enemy is. You know where enemy territory is, right? All these terms that you hear during like World War II movies and things like that. When you're in an urban environment, and there is no forward line of troops, there is no rear echelon, there is no. The enemy could literally be, and it's not two-dimensional either. It's very three-dimensional, because you've got subterranean, you got sewers and underground activity that the bad guys could be moving around in and coming up from the bottom, or you could be getting ambushed or taking fire from above, like in the rooftops, things like that. So it's very three-dimensional. So the fact that they're covering and moving, and all of a sudden they start taking contact from the rear of the patrol. Insurgent fighters had followed us and heavily engaged us with AK-47s and PKC, belt-fed machine guns, and rounds smashed into nearby walls and kicked up dust in the streets at our feet. Immediately, we responded with withering gunfire of our own. Our SEAL machine gunners were an awesome sight to behold, fiercely laying down fire with deadly accuracy even as enemy rounds impacted all around them. Like a well-oiled machine, we executed a center peel maneuver. I won't get into that, but it's kind of like another cover move position, but it's a very quick one. A coordinated tactic where two columns systematically alternate shooting at the enemy and moving away in a safe direction until able to break contact. I lobbed a few 40mm grenades over their heads of our patrol and onto the enemy's position to help keep their heads down as we bounded back. Our overwhelming fire quickly repulsed the enemy attack, and we continued to a street corner that provided additional cover. Moving in a hurry toward COP Falcon, those courageous SEAL machine gunners have provided the cover fire that enabled us to move safely through the maelstrom. Within minutes, we covered the remaining distance to the COP and made our way past the Abrams tank guarding the entrance. We pushed past the concertina wire and concrete barriers into the relatively safety of the U.S. Army combat outpost. We were breathing hard, and after running and gunning in the late morning heat, with heavy gunfire, we had all survived without a scratch. The LPO, our leading petty officer, and I smiled and laughed at each other. We had just gotten ourselves out of a solid gunfight on the street, hammered the enemy, and brought everyone back unscathed. It was awesome. We were fired up. And I got to tell you, just real quick, whenever we got into a gunfight or we got hit by an IED or anything like that, like when we're in the shit, we were just, you are focused on nothing else, just the shit. But when you get back into the fob and you realize that everyone's okay, that the feeling of elation and excitement and euphoria is unlike anything else I could ever describe. And I could easily see how people that experience that routinely can easily become addicted to that. It's a different feeling when you come back and your guys are wounded or killed. However, unfortunately, but when you're in a firefight and you realize the bad guys are just trying to kill you and they didn't touch you, it is unlike anything else I could describe. It's incredible. But already back at Cop Falcon was our platoon chief. He had been with the Cordon and search force that he had returned earlier with Jocko and the rest of the small team of SEALs and the Iraqi soldiers. Chief wasn't happy. He pulled me aside.
You don't want to piss off Chief either.
Right. Chief pulled Leif aside. Now, keep in mind here, and this is kind of the part that I think is interesting. The chief, even though the chief and Jocko were so the chief was Jocko's enlisted counterpart, right? So technically, Leif outranked the chief because Leif was an officer.
Right, always.
Wasn't, right? But by position, the chief kind of, at the end of the day, the chief's going to say whatever he wants to the platoon commanders because...
As long as he says sir at the end.
Yeah, right.
I mean, this is one of those instances because, and I like how Jocko in the book, did him and Leif do.
Yeah.
They call them the senior enlisted advisor. And that's something that's kind of, it's not exclusive to the Navy, but the Navy, especially special operations, that's how they look at their petty officers.
Right.
Especially their chief petty officers.
Right.
They look at them. Bottom line is, if they're making a decision, a really good officer, and this is anywhere, but they're really going to look at that. They're going to lean on that chief because the chief's usually been there 20 years.
He has the experience.
He's got the experience. Bottom line, I very rarely will you find an officer with more experience.
Right.
Meaning, in that billet, right?
Yep.
Just saying. So
the officer has the command. The enlisted have the experience.
Right. So I really love the fact that they use that term, senior enlisted advisor, and because that's yeah. And obviously they use it in other branches too. It's just
it's a way of thinking. It's the mentality of it.
It is the mentality, and you can tell. Hence, that's Jocko's way of thinking. He totally looks at them as like advisors,
right?
And you know what? That's right. Even in like the good officers in the Army and the Marines will look at their platoon sergeants, their first sergeants, their sergeant majors as mentors, frankly.
Yeah.
Now they
absolutely right.
They don't necessarily. It's not necessarily a mentor. It's just a mentor for doing the job right because they have that experience.
And it's been in my 10 years of in the military as an NCO primarily. I will tell you that officers that did this well, that leaned on their NCOs and saw them as advisors and took their advice, not always followed their recommendations, but at least took their advice and were willing to listen and ask questions and even ask for help. Officers that did that, I can honestly tell you they did much better in their officer careers than officers that did not.
Yes.
Right? That's just a fact. So anyway, Chief was not happy. So he pulled Leif aside and he says, quote, "What the hell were you guys doing out there?" The chief asked sternly. Leif's like, "Well, what do you mean?" I asked. immediately getting defensive.
Like, what the fuck?
Right. The chief was a hell of a battlefield leader, extraordinary in a gunfight, with a long career. This is what we were just talking about. With a long career of nearly 20 years, he was the most experienced SEAL in the task unit, and we highly valued his guidance and mentorship. Never one to shy away from a fight. He was courageous and always eager to close with and destroy the enemy. So why now was he critical of us, particularly my leadership on the battlefield? Quote, "What are you talking about?" I said Leif. "What didn't you leave?" Or he said, "Why?" The chief says, "Why didn't you leave the other SEAL sniper Overwatch positioned OPI in place to cover your movement back here to Cop Falcon?" asked the chief. So what ended up happening is there was two elements out there. So Leif was in control of one element, and then there was another element that ended up going back to, that did their own cover and move, but didn't do the cover and move between elements. Does that make sense? So it's like two platoons are out there, and each platoon did their own internal cover and move, but the two platoons weren't covering each other, right? That's basically what happened here. Yep. And then Leif said, I thought about that for a moment, and my initial defensiveness wore off. He was right. No reason, I replied, understanding that his logic was absolutely correct. I realized my error. I was so focused on our own squad's dilemma, I didn't think to coordinate with the other team, or OPI, to work together. We absolutely should have. This was the first rule in Jocko's law of combat, cover and move. I had broken it. We had used cover and move within our own immediate OP2 team, but I had forgotten about the greater team and support available. We had operated independently, failing to support or help each other. We had left OP1 in place. Had we left OP1 in place, they would have had an excellent advantage from the high ground to cover and would have been able to cover our OP2 movement much of the way as we patrolled through the dangerous streets back to Cop Falcon. Once at the Cop, we, or OP2, could have provided additional cover for OP1 as they returned to Cop Falcon.
Because when you have cover, it just takes pressure off of you.
Right.
Like we've said, you have enough shit to do. You have enough shit to think about, and if you know that you have a eye in the sky, for lack of a way of putting it, and somebody watching your back from another position, it's just a giant weight, and that translates into life too. And this is what happens so often, is even in parenting, cover and move. I mean, it works everywhere, man. Yeah. It literally works everywhere.
So here's the principle. We'll talk about it, and then we'll move into the next chapter. So the principle, cover and move. It is the most fundamental tactic, perhaps the only tactic. Put simply, cover and move means teamwork. All elements within the greater team are crucial and must work together to accomplish the mission, mutually supporting one another for that simple, singular purpose. Departments and groups within the team must break down silos, depend on each other, and understand who depends on them. If they forsake this principle and operate independently or work against each other, the results can be catastrophic to the overall team's performance. Within any team, there are divisions that arise. Often, when similar teams within the team get so focused on their immediate tasks, they forget about what others are doing and how they are depending on other teams. They may start to compete with one another. And then there are obstacles, animosity, and blame develops. This creates friction and inhibits the overall team's performance. It falls on leaders to continuously keep perspective on the strategic mission and remind the team that they are part of the greater team and the strategic mission is paramount. Each member of the team is critical to success, through the main effort and supporting efforts must be clearly identified. If the overall team fails, everyone fails. If even a specific member or an element within the team did their job successfully, pointing fingers and placing blame on other contributors to further dissension between teams and individuals. These individuals and teams must instead find ways to work together, communicate with each other, and mutually support one another. The focus must always be on the best accomplishment of the mission. Alternatively, when the team succeeds, everyone within the supporting that team succeeded, every individual and every team within the larger team gets to share in the success. Accomplishing the strategic mission is the highest priority. Team members, departments, and supporting assets must always cover and move to help each other, work together, and support each other in order to win. This principle is integral for any team to achieve victory. And so this really talks a lot, in particular with the work that I do. And my particular role is I have to work with every department of our organization. And each team, each organization or department is very different. Their missions are different. And sometimes my mission, in order for me to be successful, is in addition to that department's mission, so it's easy to implement things. But sometimes it's very conflicting. Sometimes my mission conflicts with the other department's mission. So I have to find synergies and find ways to work with the other element, the other teams within my organization to be successful. And so that's the first point is you can operate on your own. It's very similar. Like if you are in a department at a company, and whether you're the leader of that department or you're a member of that department, and all you focus on is that one department, and you're not looking at the bigger picture, and you're not covering and moving, there's a glass ceiling to how successful you will be overall, because it's the individuals and it's the departments that recognize the greater good and the bigger mission, that decide to tear down those silos and those walls that work with other departments. Those folks are going to see much greater success in both experience, career advancement, and everything that goes along with it, than those that are very siloed. So that's just kind of a point to take away from this. The other point that I found very interesting that I already kind of touched on a little bit was the idea that this the chief pulled Leif aside and gave him this feedback, and we already established that the chief technically, that Leif outranked the chief, but the chief still provided this feedback, and I think that's incredible. And Leif was smart enough to take that feedback. So it's two things. One, and I'm kind of taking that example and putting it into a corporate setting. One, you want your directs to have the courage to come and tell you, the truth, and to give you feedback. And you, as the leader, as the manager, you have to be humble enough in order to receive that feedback.
Comes back to the last chapter, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely does. Because if you, here's a real world example. I was recently, last week, at a meeting in a different facility, and I was talking to some people, and I was there with one of my directs. And she just listened, observed, didn't say anything. And then later in the week, we had our one-on-one, because I have one-on-ones with my folks. And we get, halfway through the one-on-one, and she kind of looks at me. She says, "Can I give you some feedback?" And I said, "Sure." And she goes, "When we were at that meeting over at the other facility earlier this week, when you were talking," she goes, "it seemed really fake." And I was like, and when you're getting good feedback when you immediately move into a defensive posture.
Yeah,
right?
Because you feel it. You feel that twinge. You feel that tinge of, what?
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's usually a trigger. Or it's not a trigger. It is. It's a trigger to know, hey, guess what? This is some good shit. You should listen.
Yes.
Drop the ego freaking shield. Put the shield down, Captain America. The fucking good shit's coming at you.
Yes, if it stings a little, you need to start listening, right? Shut up and listen.
Yeah, because what? You learned from abrasion.
Yeah.
There it is.
So she said this, and I instantly went into this like, well, I don't know what you're talking about, and then I was like, oh, hold on, I'm sorry, I'm in a position of being defensive right now, and I said, hold on, let me just clear this right now.
Let me take a deep breath.
Yeah, and I did that. I was like, okay, now I'm ready to hear what you have to say.
I'm ready to receive your message.
I'm ready to receive. And this is coming from one of my directs, right? And I said, okay, tell me more. And while she talked, I wanted so bad to deflect or to, because I was embarrassed, and my ego was being, worked over right here. But I knew that two things were happening. One, I needed to hear it, and two, I did my job as a manager. And let me just say this for anyone listening: if you're a manager, you know you're doing things right when your directs have the comfort level to come to you about feedback about you. If your directs do not provide you with any feedback about you or what you're doing or how you're leading the team, then they either don't trust you enough to be honest and candid, or you haven't provided an environment that makes them feel safe enough to provide feedback of that nature, right? And it's my goal as the leader of my department to make sure that I've cultivated an environment where my directs are comfortable enough to be able to provide me feedback, because they feel secure that they won't get backlash, that they won't get, you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Even if it's behind, well, it should be behind closed doors, but sometimes you have to, the only caveat to what you're saying is sometimes it depends on where you're at. Now, as a leader, you should always cultivate that with your folks, but sometimes the greater organization is totally fucked up.
Yeah,
and that's gonna be a challenge. Yep, because the whole culture is tainted, right?
Yeah, right.
So,
and that's
that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes. And it makes it really hard because, and this is no fault of the manager, but a lot of times they have no juice. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you have the best ideas on the planet if they'll never be instituted because your boss's boss is a tool bag.
That's true.
So, unfortunately, it really depends on where you're at. But all you can do is lead, and do the best that you can with what you're given. And then in turn, you as a leader, because the reason I'm bringing this up, Eddie, is because I know I've had conversations with people recently that I know this is because they've listened to this podcast. They've read the book now, and they're like, well, I can't, they feel very helpless because they can't, even as a manager in their company, they can't institute some of this stuff because there's a ceiling. There's a ceiling to it. And unfortunately, their leadership is not willing to hear it. So the buck kind of stops with them. Right now, what I say and what I propose to them, and this is one of those parts that takes courage, is challenge your leadership.
Yep.
And make them better. Fucking buy them a copy of the book and hand it to them. Yep. Or I mean, I've seen it. I've heard of this being done too, is if you want somebody to just walk, there's ways. You're sneaky motherfuckers. You can all be sneaky. I know it. Put the book on the boss's desk.
Yep.
Plant what you have to become then, if you have this problem with the ceiling, right, is you have to plant seeds. You have to you have to become a farmer now.
Yeah.
You have to plant seeds. You have to water them from time to time and but it's very strategic in a lot of instances. And there's ways to manipulate your environment. You just have to be able to know when and how, and not be so fucking impatient, and have patience, right?
Yeah.
And again, do it on the down low, because it's amazing. And we've said this in prior chapters too, but it's resounding throughout this entire thing with teamwork, especially because it goes very well with this chapter. Is it's amazing what you can get done when you don't care who gets the credit.
Right.
So that's a tool, especially if you have a boss that's an egomaniac. Let them get all the fucking credit. Who cares? Whatever. But at the end of the day, I mean, the cream rises to the top, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is that the right saying?
Yeah, cream rises to the top. Absolutely.
So at some point, you just have to have faith that it'll work itself out in the long game. Because, yeah, it just is.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of good points that you bring up there. Is you can only control what you can control.
Yes,
right?
I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that.
But here's the thing, right? If you're defeated because there's the bureaucracy or the that ceiling or the pushback or the silos, like if you feel defeated and you still refrain from controlling what you can control, then you immediately turn into that victim mentality, right?
Well, and you're just there. It's when you go into paycheck mode.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just here to collect a fucking paycheck.
Yeah.
I'm not here to, this isn't part of my life. This is just me working every day. And this is the mundane bullshit, right? That people get caught in the suit and tie. I come here, I do this for someone else. I work, instead of actually focusing on it as a training ground.
Right.
To do bigger and better things, right? I mean, this is what you have to do. Mm-hmm. So.
And I've done back to the slipping and like the book thing. So two things I have in the past, in very covert operations, slipped a book onto my boss's desk.
Or the advertent email that's got a cool like TED Talk in it, and you blast it out to the entire work group. And I thought this is motivating. This is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Here, let everyone see it, right? So but it's one of those things. Yeah, I mean, there's sneaky, covert shit.
I've been on the receiving end, however, and at a different job.
You're like, you motherfuckers.
I was actually. It wasn't covert though. This manager was a manager outside of my department, so it had no. Wasn't in my chain of command. Let's just say that. And this manager ended up handing me a book. And he said, and he was a veteran too. And he says, I think you should read this. And I said, okay, yeah, got it. And he goes, no, I really think you should read this. I'm like, yeah, okay, good. And I just kind of stuck it in my bag or whatever. Would you ever guess the name of the book, Bennett?
What year was it?
This was back in 2008, 9-ish, 10 maybe.
No, I can't think of the name. I know it's going to be like, oh yeah, but
So the book was How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Jesus Christ.
So
Carnegie.
Needless to say,
one of the best books ever. Basically,
I was struggling in that department at the time, unbeknownst to myself. Like I didn't realize I was struggling as bad as I was in that area.
Talk about planting seeds and playing the game.
Yeah, yes.
That's the book. That's the fucking playbook right there.
So the lesson here is if you're ever handed a book, right? You should consider that two kinds of gifts. One, it's a gift. It's a physical book. You just received a gift, a book. Thank you for the gift. The second gift that you just received was some very candid feedback that's being delivered to you by way of this book.
And they wouldn't give it to you if they didn't give a shit.
That's true.
They
Absolutely
wouldn't give
true.
it to you. Who the fuck is going to spend money. I mean, I guess they don't have to necessarily buy it, but either way, well, they've had to come across it somehow. So someone actually took the time and had the wherewithal to give you a book because they care.
Yep.
It might not be about you. It might be about the greater mission. So don't get fucking fluffy about it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, they care enough about something within your world to try and make you a better leader, manager, person. Fill that fucking blank, right?
And it comes in different forms. Like, you could be given an actual hard copy of a book, or you could just receive that random email one day and says, hey, I just read this book. I think you might really like it. That's also a nice way of saying, here's a book that I think you could benefit from, because there's some concepts or elements in this book that you could probably, if you leveraged, would be a more productive or better executor, or be beneficial in some way, right? So feedback comes in many, many different forms. And regardless of what form feedback comes to you, just recognize that it takes courage on behalf of the person that's providing you that feedback. It took a lot of courage even though I've cultivated that environment within my team, it still took her a lot of courage to look me in the eyes and tell me that...
And call your ass out.
Right? That took a lot of damn courage, right? And so you've got to understand where that's coming from. And if she didn't give a shit, she just wouldn't have said anything. But she cares enough about my success and about me as her leader to be open and candid with that. And I was like, wow, right? Once I internalized that feedback and I thought about it and I reminisced on it for a while, and I started to ask, myself, how is this true? What did I do? What behaviors did I emit? Because in that meeting, in my mind, I was being totally genuine, but apparently I was coming off as other than genuine.
Other than genuine.
Yeah, the term she used was fake, right? Like, we're going straight to the fake news here, people. So I was just like, damn.
Fake as fuck.
So cover and move. It's important. You've got to cover down on your team and help them move. You've also got to cover and move within your department, within your organization, but also within your family, right? Covering move as parents, as a father, as a husband. It's a very simple concept, but you got to do it, man. You got to put it into practice.
Yeah, try not to be an asshole about it.
Yes,
it works. Right. It works better.
Just saying. Don't sit the family down and be like, okay, kids, today we're going to learn about cover and move.
Yeah, I'm totally guilty as charged of being an asshole trying to explain stuff to my wife and kids and stuff. And my wife's really good at calling me out. Mm-hmm.
And that covert hidden slipping of the book doesn't work with your significant other either, by the way.
Usually you just have to buy it and give it to them. Just be like, here, fucking read this. My big book as of late, and I've given out 2 copies of it. A whole whopping 2. But still, a lot of people don't do that shit, is the book Unfuck Yourself.
Yes.
And if you've never heard of this book, you should.
Right.
Go look into it. It's fucking amazing. Don't get it confused with the subtle art of not giving a fuck.
Right.
It is called Unfuck Yourself, and it is really good. It really is.
I read the subtle art of...
Yeah, you haven't read Unfuck Yourself.
No,
I know you haven't.
Who's the author?
Shit.
Is it a woman?
No, it's a man.
Okay,
and he's British.
Okay. There's a book that was similar to that. It was authored by a woman. I can't remember her name.
Yeah, hold on. Gary John Bishop is his name.
Huh. Okay.
We could put it in the show notes.
Yeah, that's my next book on my list. Okay.
It's called Unfuck Yourself. Get out of your head and into your life.
Interesting.
It is very good. And it's one of those books where you'll, read it or listen to it, and you'll be sitting there going, oh, that's not me.
Right.
But I just to give people forewarning, you need to go into it knowing that it's you.
Yeah.
Because we all do it. And the shit that he talks about, which is like, you know, your opinions, your excuses, all that shit, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Cool, man.
Yeah,
well,
it's a good one.
Let's move into Chapter 6, Simple. Combat Outpost Falcon Ramadi Iraq into the fray. Whoom. Let's talk about Simple, sir.
So, give me 1 minute here. Of course, the wife decides to text me right now.
She's like, hey, I hear you talking about me in there.
No, she's not. We have a crisis, not a crisis, but it's something with my daughter, one of my daughters this weekend, about where she's going and what she's doing and if she's going and if she's doing it. So,
are you working tomorrow?
I am working tomorrow. Well, by the way, folks, today is the 4th of July. Happy 4th of July, even though you won't hear this for a week.
Right.
Yeah, so I work. I'm off today, but I work tomorrow. So I part of it I get because it's sticking her with a pile of shit a little bit because she is not working tomorrow.
Right.
But I feel like I can sufficiently deal with this shit today. It's got to do with kids. Everything can't be fucking equal. It just isn't. It's not life, right? And my middle daughter is going to get to go someplace that everyone wants to go. But she's fucking earned it.
Right.
Bottom line. At the end of the day, she's earned it. But for some reason, this is one of those things, like you feel like to capitulate the other two that live at home, you've got to give them a time when they're going to possibly be able to go. And I'm like, no, fuck that. No. She goes because she's getting to go because she earned it. So you also need to earn it. So if the time arises and you can participate and go to said place, but if you haven't earned it, you're not going. Right. You know, and there's clear, concise things, actions that happen that allow you to do this. Right? So if you do this shit every day, then you will have the opportunity. But if you don't, then I know that. And you don't get to go.
Right.
Suck it up. Do the right thing. Right?
Yep.
Live by the SOP that's given to you. Live by
That's
the
right.
standard operating procedures and the basic expectations. And if you can't, it's simple, right? So we're going into this freaking chapter.
Well, that's
it's simple.
The thing is, if everybody knew the SOP and everybody knew what was at stake at the end, and everyone that was on the level playing field to achieve it, like, you know what I mean?
Yep.
If one person achieved it and the other ones didn't, then you know.
Well, this is the thing. This is the only rub with this whole situation is that it was never conveyed that this could be the prize at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, there's always that fucking possibility.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So again, and I had this conversation at 12:30 last night with my 14-year-old. If you don't do the stuff that's basic that I ask you, that your mother and I ask you to do, you don't get to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Because what? Discipline equals freedom.
Yep.
So if you're disciplined enough to do the basic stuff, then you can do whatever the fuck you want to do within reason.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I give you permission to do whatever you want to do within reason.
Right.
But if you don't have your room clean, if you don't have your bed made, if you don't have your clothes picked up off the floor, if you don't have them put away, if you don't have dishes that are in your sink cleaned, you don't get to do shit until that's done. And I'm sick of always telling you to do it. So again, it's a cascade, right? So you either do the basics I mean, the expectations are posted on their fucking wall, right? Literally in writing. And they're nothing weird. It's basic life skills, right? And we'll go back to a SEAL. It's like General McRaven in his speech that he gave at the University of Texas before he retired, right? Make your fucking bed.
Yeah.
When you get out of bed, make it. Things like that. It's literally that simple when we're talking about simplicity. There's nothing complicated. You could do it with your eye. I do it with my eyes closed basically every morning because I'm in a fucking coma when I get up.
Yeah.
Right? So, do the basics and you get to do what you want. But until you can do that, then you don't get to do anything. You go to work and you come home. That's it. So, anyway, my middle daughter has done it. She's taken on more responsibility because she wants stuff to get done. And I feel as though she should be rewarded by that.
Right.
Without being asked.
Yeah.
It might be a pain in the ass because she actually pushes us. I want to paint my room. I want to get it set up. I want to do this. I want to do that. You know what I mean? But she's taking initiative and she's taking responsibility.
So what's the prize? Is it Claire's in the mall?
No, it's going
store?
No, it's going to the St. Lawrence River. With
cool.
other family members of ours.
Yeah.
So
that's pretty cool.
It is. It's gorgeous up there, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So shit. I just closed the book to pull up that other book. So let me get back. All right. So the chapter 6, simple, right? So this is Jocko's chapter, his narration.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to start at the beginning and read a little bit. So Combat Outpost Falcon, Ramadi, Iraq, into the fray. Whoom! A massive explosion shook the walls of the building I was sitting in, right in the middle of Combat Outpost Falcon. Adrenaline shot from my core, down my arms, into my hands. Seconds later, another explosion rocked the compound. Soon the word spread. Mortars insurgents had lobbed 120 millimeter mortars, Jesus, which are big, the big boys. Mortar rounds smack dab into the center of Cop Falcon with deadly accuracy. 120s were vicious. Each massive projectile carried 20 plus pounds of high explosives wrapped in a half-inch thick steel jacket designed to throw jagged pieces of shrapnel in all directions, causing catastrophic wounds and death. The rounds had wounded several American soldiers at Cop Falcon, one critically, who later succumbed to his injuries. A third 120 millimeter mortar round hit the roof of the building I was in. Thankfully, for the soldiers nearby, it didn't explode. It was a dud. The mortars were alarmingly accurate, proving once again that the insurgents who we were fighting were highly capable. As daylight dawned on this early morning, it was a grim reminder that this was dangerous territory, and we were sitting right in the middle of it. The night before, Leif and his SEALs from Task Force Bruiser had inserted from a U.S. Marine Corps small unit riverine craft, or a Cirque boat, manned by a great crew of highly motivated Marines. Charlie Platoon SEALs, accompanied by an expert team of 2nd U.S. Marine Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company Marines, which is the acronym for that is Anglico.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of, to an extent, do what you did in the military. To an extent.
Yeah, like a combat observer.
Yeah. To an extent, right?
Yep.
With which they often work closely. A small Army sniper team and a partner force of Iraqi soldiers had hopped from the Cirque boat onto the riverbank, and they quietly sneaked into this enemy-controlled neighborhood, one of the most violent areas of Ramadi. Our SEALs were the first U.S. boots on the ground, and they led the opening salvo of this massive operation involving hundreds of U.S. soldiers, tanks, and aircraft to establish a combat outpost literally in the center of enemy-controlled territory. So there's your There's your football. There's your 3 yards, right? So they're going out, pushing into it. Within minutes of their arrival, Charlie Platoon had killed an armed insurgent fighter patrolling the neighborhood in the early morning darkness. SEALs then seized and cleared a building complex that was to become Cop Falcon and held it for a few hours in the night while SEAL snipers provided cover for dozens of U.S. Army tanks, vehicles, and so on. An M2 Bradley fighting vehicle early in the morning before the sun had risen had linked up with Leif and Charlie Platoon. My job, this is Jocko, was command and control of our SEALs. I would coordinate their efforts with task force, bandits, soldiers. So, long story short, basically, shortly after the arrival of the SEALs, they turned the buildings they had cleared over to the Army company commander of Team Bulldog, right?
Yeah.
And the soldiers of Task Force 137 Bandit. Then Leif and most of the SEALs pushed out. They pushed out a few hundred yards down the road to Leif. Sorry, did I say Leif?
Yeah.
A few hundred yards into sniper positions, which was their main mission. I remained, and Jocko remained at the Cop Falcon to coordinate the movements, right?
Yep.
So now, obviously this mission, took extensive planning, intense labor to haul in place some 30,000 sandbags, over 150 concrete barriers, and hundreds of yards of concertina wire. It had been a long night. The jarring impact of the deadly mortars was our morning wake-up call. So
if you've never filled sandbags, I'll tell you, I have. Did I ever tell you my Article 15 story in Korea?
No.
Bro. Did you know I got an Article 15?
No, but we can talk about mine too, but not right now. We'll talk about it another time.
I think we need to share our Article 15 stories at some
point.
Well,
before with this being said, though, this is literally amazing. They basically took the compound, right, and set up a cop overnight.
Yes.
Like the insurgents went to sleep. The morning they wake up and there's a fucking cop in the middle of their shit.
Like, oh my God, where did these guys come from? Yeah.
Right.
30,000 sandbags, bro.
Yeah. I mean, seriously?
Yeah.
Haul and in place.
That's
30,000 sandbags.
That almost, dude, that's a lot of sandbags.
And then those big ass Jersey barriers, the concrete barriers,
yes.
150 of those motherfuckers.
And it sounds to me like, I don't know, but if they did this covertly, I don't know if they had front end loaders and backhoes.
Well,
and
I
shit
think
in there
that
they
had to clear the space enough to get that, and then they pushed. And then what they're saying is that he's saying this that the SEALs pushed out, right? I mean, and they didn't do it unscathed. There was intermittent small arms fire throughout. But this is where the Americans, and this is one of those things where we operate a lot at night.
Yep.
Because we have the cover of darkness and we can see at night.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there was plenty of insurgents that came from other places that had some NVG capabilities, but it was one off. Mm-hmm. There might have been 1 per 100.
And most of the gear or technology that they had, unfortunately, came from soldiers that were killed.
Yeah.
And,
or
equipment that they were able to grab out of trucks or whatever, right?
Someone was able to get from Bass Pro Shops.
Yeah, right.
Or whatever, you know what I'm saying, right?
Yep. They didn't have any over there, but they would have them shipped in.
Right. Exactly, my friend. And they coordinated their attacks with fucking Twitter. So.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, so Army engineers were the ones doing most of that work, right? Moving the sandbags, moving the shit, swinging hammers and all that, operating heavy machinery, all that stuff. So after they'd all pushed out the 4-story apartment building a few hundred meters down the street, Leif relayed to Jocko via radio that his SEAL snipers had engaged enemy fighters maneuvering to attack Cop Falcon. But building the combat outpost in enemy territory was only the beginning, and there was more to be done, right? So basically what's the moral here? So we've got the insurgents have been proved and are becoming more sophisticated in their operations, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There was a young American soldier in charge of the. So I'm jumping ahead. So we get the idea of where they're at, right?
Yeah.
So jumping ahead, they instituted what were these transition teams, right? The MIT teams.
Yep.
And that was to bring, it's to turn the safety and security over to Iraqi troops, right?
Yeah.
Faster. So they had these MIT teams, and a U.S. Army officer from the MIT team, which is they're teams of soldiers and Marines built and deployed to train combat advised soldiers, Iraqi soldiers, right? Did you guys do any shit with that, or was that after your time?
Well, no, we had in our southern FOB, Camp Cuervo, we had, that's where the ICDC, or Iraqi Civil Defense Corps soldiers were that I told the story about last week. And they had a barracks there, and there was some elements of Army. I'm not sure if they were infantry or what they were, but they were there to kind of run almost like a paramilitary school of sorts and try to teach these guys how to wear a uniform, how to march, how to shoot. And so we were trying to train in the ICDC. Again, the Iraq Civil Defense Corps ended up evolving into the Iraqi National Guard, which then evolved into the Army, the Iraqi regular Army. And then, and then it grew into like police and other things too. But that's really kind of where it started. So there was always kind of an attempt anyway. There was always an attempt from the very beginning to get Iraqi military reestablished within because when I was there was no real law, there was no real police departments.
Like
there
the
was
Wild
no
West,
real
baby.
Yeah, I mean they didn't have like the streets. Baghdad's it's a city. It's a very dense urban city. Cars, traffic, everything. And there's no, the street lights didn't even work.
Well, and a lot of it's ancient, frankly. There's a lot of it that's been there hundreds of years and not made for Humvees to drive down the streets, that type of shit. So you had no choice but to patrol a lot of this stuff on foot.
Yeah, well, we get into the residential area, and that was, even the roadways or the alleys between that separated the houses weren't wide enough for Humvees to go down.
Right.
So it would be wide enough if there wasn't a freaking car parked halfway down.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You couldn't push out of the way. You had to you couldn't go around it either.
Just roll over it.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you have these MIT teams, and so we've given out obviously where they're operating is in hostile territory, right? So you've got this MIT team that's coming in, and the young U.S. officer that's in charge wants to take now these Iraqi soldiers are better trained than a lot of other soldiers, right?
Yeah.
Because they've basically been through boot camp and had advanced training. And they want to patrol this new territory of the enemy so they can test their mettle, in essence, right?
Right, yeah.
And because of this guy's excitement, the MIT leader had ignored the dangers, but he also didn't know. So he didn't know. You only know what you know, right? So he didn't know the dangers that was going on, and he was exposing himself and his troops who were accompanying him on this patrol. And he walked up to because then Jocko had assigned a SEAL team to also like provide overwatch and to kind of help this MIT team do this patrol, right?
Yeah.
But it was this planned route was just ridiculous. Right? So it's also, on top of that, environmentally, it's 115 degrees in the summertime.
Well, not only that, but the patrol that this MIT team officer was proposing was a much larger patrol route than they had.
Right. So, and that's what I was getting on.
And it was crossing multiple areas, different because when you're out on in this battle space, it's segmented, right?
Yes.
You got different elements that control different areas.
Yeah, you have different areas of operation.
Right. And so this patrol that he was proposing would actually cross through or go through or cross over a couple of different areas of operation that were outside. So it would require a whole nother layer of coordinating with the adjacent units to say, hey, I'm coming into your battle space. Here's where you know what I mean? And then if you end up taking enemy contact while you're in somebody else's battle space, that you have to call their command and control.
Yeah,
in order
so you
to
have
get
to coordinate.
Yeah, it's way more complex.
So let me just, you know what? The best way to do this is just to read this part because it's very self-explanatory.
Yeah, man.
So the MIT leaders and the advising team had been working with these soldiers for months, right? And he had been working and training with them for several months in another city in northern Iraq and had conducted some fairly benign patrols and combat operations with them. But this was Ramadi. There was nothing easy or benign about patrolling into these neighborhoods. There, the enemy was determined, well-armed, and ready, and they would be waiting to attack and kill any U.S. soldier, SEAL, Marine, or Iraqi soldier that they could. My immediate discussions with the MIT leader revealed that he did not fully appreciate the dangers that lay in store. I was also concerned that his Iraqi soldiers might not yet be ready for intense street fighting that was likely to take place in this sector of Ramadi, so I assigned a small group of SEALs to accompany him and his Iraqi soldiers as command and control to help coordinate any help should they need it. I stood with one of the Charlie Platoon's young SEAL officers, which are Leif's people, who would lead the SEAL element accompanying the Iraqi soldiers as the MIT leader strolled over to us and pulled out his battle map to brief us on the route he intended to patrol. He outlined a path that snaked through the treacherous city streets and stretched clear across south-central Ramadi over to the next U.S. command outpost to the east, Cop Eagle's Nest. This was nearly 2 kilometers through some of the most hostile territory in Iraq held by a determined and vicious enemy. None of the roads had been cleared by the U.S. minesweeping teams, so no doubt massive IEDs lay buried along the route. That meant U.S. armored vehicles and firepower could not get to the patrol along much of the leader's planned path without putting the vehicles at huge risk should he and his Iraqis and now our SEALs get pinned down. So, damn. Right? So there's your route. Beyond that, his planning route passed through the battle space owned by different American units, including 2 U.S. Army companies, another Army battalion, and a U.S. Marine Corps company. Each had unique standard operating procedures and utilized separate radio nets. What a fucking nightmare.
Right?
What that would mean coordinating with all these units prior to the launch and setting up contingency plans for help should something go wrong. The amount of water needed for such a long trek.
Not should, when something.
When something. Right. Not if, but when. Yeah. The amount of water needed for such a long trek in the Iraqi summertime heat that exceeded 115 degrees along this with massive amounts of ammunition required to penetrate so deeply into the enemy territory added up to far more than anyone could effectively fight with or carry. So, Jesus. Right? So
yeah, good job, LT.
Good job, LT. But that's fine. He just doesn't know. But again, it's one of those things. You have to have the humility to be like, so talk to me about what's going on here.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, talk to the boots on the ground of, like, what the fuck? So, bottom line is, Jocko listened to the plan, and he understood the overall idea and complexity, to say the least. Complexity it involved. He commented, Lieutenant, and this is a quote, Lieutenant, I appreciate your motivation to get out there and get after it. And I can hear his voice. His voice saying this. Yeah. And get after it. Perhaps, at least for your first few patrols, we need to simplify this a little bit.
A little bit.
Simplify, asked the MIT team incredulously. It is just a patrol. How complex can it get?
Jesus.
Right. Like, I mean, I don't know. It kind of baffles my mind that, like, what did he do? Did they just come in, offload, and be like, all right, here's what we're doing? Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
like
without any talk.
But
I have to say this. He is a lieutenant.
He is a lieutenant. But, I mean, how many... This is tough. This is a tough position, right? Because really quick, if I kind of bring some work experience into this, I've got, like I said, I got some folks that work for me, and they're often working projects. And, when they bring a project to me, I've been in this position where they're like, oh, I want to do this and this and this. We're going to do this and that and this and the other thing. And as this project, as they're describing this project unfolds, I'm thinking about all of the other things that were clearly not considered, right? About the coordination, about, other elements, about stakeholders, about costs, expenses, timelines, right? I'm thinking about all these other things that were probably not taken into consideration. But I have to temper that and pull it back a little bit without stifling that hunger and stifling that aggressive, you know what I mean? Because, I mean, you want a lieutenant to come in there and be like, let's do this shit, right? We're going to do this and this and this. Like,
right.
Like that's, I mean, you want that. So you got your, like, Jocko's in a position now where he's got to temper this lieutenant and kind of pull him back into reality without stomping all over his ego too bad, right?
Right.
Because otherwise he's going to be like, oh, fuck,
crush this fucking kid. He's just going to crush him. Right,
and that's leadership,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
You want your subordinates to be successful. You don't want to hamper, hinder, or detract from their zealousness. But you know what I mean. So this is what the other book that they wrote, Dichotomy of Leadership. This is a dichotomy of leadership.
Yes.
And that's where I think you're going next, is kind of how did Jocko
yes, exactly. And it
talk to this guy about kind of pulling this back into, like, I don't know, bring it back into reality here, right. Guy.
Because so Jocko nodded his head respectfully. Like, I understand that it's just a patrol, right? I know it's just a patrol, I said, but there are some risks that can compound when working in an environment like this. It's nothing I haven't trained these Iraqis on, he responded confidently. While I appreciated his confidence, I knew it was hard for the lieutenant to fully grasp the complexities of the mission he was planning when he had not executed missions in such hostile environments. I know you have trained them well. See, so he's so good, man. Mm-hmm. He acknowledges them. He, you know what I mean, and restates their beliefs, but then he's like, but I know you've trained them well, and I'm sure your Iraqi soldiers are a good group. Knowing it was likely they had never seen a serious firefight together, but let's look at what you have here. This route will take you through 3 separate battle spaces, right? I mean, he lays out what we just talked about.
Yeah.
And brings up the CAS evac and brings up fire support and brings up the different radio nets.
Well, here's the thing. It's 3 battle spaces, 2 are Army and 1 are Marine Corps. So now you're going cross cross branches even.
Right. Oh yeah,
right?
And which have totally different SOPs.
Right, different.
Whew.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a fucking shitstorm.
Yeah, this is like, wow. Like, I read this and I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah, I was like,
no
what?
way.
And that was what I was thinking too. Is like, who the fuck is this lieutenant? Right?
He's got his Captain America shield on.
Yeah. Oh, fuck yeah, he does. Holy shit. So Jocko finally says, listen. So after he lays it all out there, at least for this first patrol, can we simplify this a little by cutting down the distance and keeping the entire patrol inside battle space owned by company, by that company, which is the Team Bulldog, right?
Yeah.
That'll only, and then the MIT leader comes back. Well, that'll be only a few hundred meters out. And the MIT leader objected, right?
That's not nearly far enough for a Medal of Honor.
Right. It's nearly. That's not even Silver Star stuff, man.
Right.
I need some MOH freaking distance here.
Yeah.
I might not even get a Bronze Star out of this.
Like, this is like...
Right. So that will only be a few hundred meters, the MIT leader
like
objected.
a good conduct medal.
Right.
That's all this is.
Army commendation. I know. I replied, I know it seems short, but let's just keep it simple to start, and we can expand as we get more experience, right? Like, I do this shit with my kids all the time. I'm like, rein it in there, Nelly. Hold on.
Right, yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let's just get a job first.
Yeah, right.
All right, can we just get a job? Or how about we just start with a resume?
Yeah.
Right? Before all of a sudden we're the CEO of freaking, Chase Manhattan. So he talks him down, and they come down to this, right? And I knew the one real operation in this environment for the MIT leader would convince him that simplicity was the key. So after some further discussion, the MIT leader agreed to a much shorter, simpler route. And soon after, the MIT leader and his Iraqi soldiers and small contingent of SEALs gathered around to go through the op order and blah, 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 right? Mm-hmm. So they replanned, reconvened, and after the brief, they split up to do some final preparations and all that fun stuff, right? I just hear freaking Jocko's voice. So as they got all together and they, after all was set and they were about to go out on the patrol,
yeah.
The combined element then mustered to form up and begin the patrol, and he had already coordinated with Leif to have his element of SEALs in their sniper overwatch position, right? So it's a 4-story building, 300 yards outside the perimeter of Cop Falcon, cover the movement of the Presence Patrol with sniper fire, precision weapons, all the shit, anything that they can do to mitigate that risk, right?
Yeah, machine guns, rockets,
mitigate the risk of enemy attack,
right?
So then Jocko watched closely the attitude of the troops getting ready to head out, right? Mm-hmm. So he's observing, and it wasn't real for them yet,
right?
Which I just am like, well, shit's about to get real. So finally, So Jocko walked up to his young SEAL leader and looked at him in the eye and said, "You're going to get contacted out there. It will happen quick. Stay sharp. Understand?" Right?
Yep.
My serious tone impacted the young SEAL officer, who nodded slowly. "Got it, sir. Will do." With that, I stepped back and watched the patrol head out.
Yep.
Monitoring the radio, tracking the patrol success, and suddenly, gunfire rang out. I don't even think, and I can't remember if they say it, but they were like 50 meters.
Yeah, they barely cleared the gates of the damn cop, man.
Yeah,
right?
And the next thing is pow, 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 pow. That distinct sound of an AK. Just freaking madness, right?
Yep.
And then from his position at the cop, Jocko was just listening to the radio calls, broken, jumbled, weak and thick concrete walls, freaking slowing down the radio transmission. So it's fucking chaos, right?
Yeah.
And
assholes are starting to pucker.
Assholes have puckered already, and somebody got hurt. So they had to call a Kazovac. Ugh, just madness. And this is on the simple patrol.
Right, yeah, barely outside the wire.
Right.
Yeah.
So 2 wounded, they need a Kazovac, right?
Yeah.
And because of Jocko's stellar leadership and keeping it simple, they're able to coordinate all that shit, right?
Right.
So
and have a plan. Yeah.
Yeah. So he assigned a few elements of the SEAL team. I can't get over it. I keep going back to like, what the fuck was this LT thinking?
Right. And what would happen if it was somebody other than Jocko that would have been like, go for it.
And
you know what I mean? Yeah, go on that patrol.
Jocko's a stellar leader. It's like so this is what I'm trying to get at, okay? Is that exactly what Eddie just brought up, and that this is exactly where I wanted to kind of the fire I wanted to powwow around was people like you listeners sitting here thinking about this. There's officers and other leaders in the military that would have been like, go out and see what the fuck happens. Mm-hmm. Instead of actually like mitigating that risk, they would have been like, okay, well, we're going to let this is failure porn. We're going to let this young lieutenant fail, and that's how he's going to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I just can't get my head around the fact that there are tons of leaders that would do that.
Yeah.
At the risk of all those lives.
Right.
Right. So this is why I take Jocko's leadership so seriously, because he shows me in instances like this where he's able to do this where so many leaders would not have.
Right.
Or at the very worst, they would have sent him out there like that. But at the very least, they would have been an asshole about it.
Right. Or the other way,
just crush
too.
this guy's spirit.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or the other way, it could have been like, no, LT, we're not doing that. That's dumb. We're going to do this instead. Here's your marching orders.
Right.
Execute.
Which has the same effect as just being a pure T asshole.
Right. Because now the LT is just like, okay, I'm just following orders. I've got no say in this mission. He doesn't believe in it. He's not going to commit to it. Right. Everything we talked about last week. And not only that, how well will he go in and execute? And then if things do fail, then it's he can pass the buck or pass the blame back to Jocko and say, well, it failed, but this wasn't my plan. You know what I mean? If I had done it my way, things wouldn't have turned out this way, right?
But they would have done it as like a one-up thing, like complete ego. Like, see, this is what happens when you don't listen to me, or whatever, whatever.
Yep. So this was a very delicate. I know he didn't really get into the delicacies of this, and I think that's the value of us.
Right, and that's why I take this step back and go, Jesus, like literally save this kid's life and the lives of literally dozens probably of his folks.
Saved his LT's life, but also saved face.
Yep.
And taught the LT, because we didn't get to it yet, but they come back after this, they get Kazovac and they get pulled back in, and essentially, Jocko kind of looks at the lieutenant and gives him that eye, like, see, I told you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the LT kind of gave him a look back and was like, yeah.
Well, I mean, they literally went out and got him with tanks, M113s,
M113s.
M113s.
Which, if you don't know what that is,
God.
that was the first vehicle that I was assigned to in the Army at 4th Infantry Division. I was the M113 RTO.
Yes.
And then became a driver, and we ended up looking at the serial number, and we did some research and found that that particular M113 served some time in Vietnam. Very interesting. But anyway, it is a rust bucket piece of shit. Old troop carrier is what it is.
But and that's usually the in a tank unit. That's usually the medical vehicle, right?
Right.
Yeah. So Task Force or Team Bulldog goes out. They get them tanks, M113s, and there's 2 Iraqis down, and they get them back. One lives, the other one dies. But as this is happening too, the SEALs in the Overwatch position are still engaging multiple targets, target after target, right?
Yep.
But once the tanks and everything showed up, most everything died down. But they get back to the FOB, and this lieutenant is clearly shaken, right? It had been his first serious firefight and his first real test as a leader.
Yeah.
And luckily, again, this is to Jocko's testament, he had sent that SEAL team out to cover, because holy Christ, who knows? Mm-hmm. Worst case scenario would just been horrendous. And again, not any deeper into the territory, but could have been in another unit's freaking AO, right?
Yeah.
And you couldn't even imagine. So, principles of all this, right? So, the one thing I like too is how he ended the whole story. Is he gave the SEAL team, when they came back, he gave that leader a nod, right? So he talks about that nod, and it was that knowing nod, like, good job. Yeah. But he gave the MIT team leader a different nod. And that one said, that's why we keep it simple.
Yep.
Right? The MIT leader looked back at him and didn't say a word, but his eyes communicated clearly, I know that now. I understand. So what this comes down to is simplicity is crucial to the success of any mission. Not only in combat, but in life. There's inherent complexities with everything you do, right? In most cases, when things are complicated, teams that are involved will find it very difficult to understand and execute what is involved. Therefore, it is very important that leaders should always avail simple missions and objectives to their juniors, right?
Yep.
This will make it easier for them to understand and execute their responsibilities perfectly. Plus, if somebody goes down, we've talked about this before, if their leader goes down, they know what's going on. And they can pick, if they're the next in line of succession, they can do that leader's job, right?
Right, yeah.
Especially if the shit goes down. So it's important that teams or departments ask their leaders questions. This is what the LT had failed to do. So they can get clarification on how to proceed, especially when you're coming into someone else's territory, someone else's wheelhouse. Show the fucking respect. And it goes a long way. It'll go such a long way. Leaders should be at the front line encouraging their juniors to seek clarity, right?
Yeah.
You bring that up all the time. And so that the mission's objectives are understood perfectly. In conclusion, simple as a principle is not only limited to the battlefield, but rather to all walks of life. Adopting this principle will help in avoiding inherent complexities in life, work, or missions.
And I think that there's one thing that I think the military taught me as a leader that I am able to implement in my role now in the corporate environment, and that's the concept of brief backs. And let me quickly describe what that is. So in the interest of keeping things simple, we brief our teams and we let them know this is the plan, this is what we want to do, here's the timeline, here's the people involved, this is what I expect, here's when I expect it back, right? You lay it all out, and at the very end, you look at the team and you say, do you guys understand? And they all nod their heads, yes. And you say, are there any questions? And they all nod their heads, no. If you're a leader and that's what you get for a response, take that as a huge red flag that
you better ask some fucking questions.
There's a problem, because if nobody's coming back with questions and they're nodding their heads that they understand, okay, fine. Now this is something I learned in the military that I've carried with me. We talk often about transitioning veteran activity, right? And we talk about converting military skills into civilian terminology, and everyone's trying to convert like the huge skills into civilian terminology. This is a very easy one to describe that conversion, and it's just this tactic of a brief back. And so now when I brief my team on a task or a project, we get to the end, I ask those questions at first, and I get the inevitable head nods. And then I say, okay, and I pick one of my team members and I say, you give me a brief back. Describe for me, describe back for me what I just detailed out and how that applies to your role in this project. And then they start to, because they're taking notes throughout the whole thing, so they start briefing back what they interpret what I said their mission is and what their tasks should be and when their due dates are. And it doesn't take very long to quickly identify that what I said and what they heard were probably slightly different variations of the truth, right? And it's not that, and again, it's no fault of their own. It's just, what my intent is and what I say sometimes gets interpreted differently when it's, falls on the ears of others. Yeah. So they brief back what they believe to be what I briefed, and then I can interject and say, oh, no, that's not what I meant by that. What I really need you to do is this. Do you understand? Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, got it. And then they continue on, and then it's like, I'm supposed to have this due back by next Friday. Oh, wait, no, I meant this Friday. It's due back this Friday. Oh, okay. And so that act of briefing back whenever a mission is given, even the simplest of missions, if they're not clearly understood, they could be simple, but they won't be successful.
Yeah, because you don't want to leave it up to interpretation.
Exactly right.
Exactly right. And seriously, it only takes minutes.
Yep.
A few minutes.
And not only that, but the act of my directs vocalizing that brief back, when you say something out loud, like if they're taking notes, right?
It's real then.
It's in their mind and they're taking notes of what they interpreted, what they believe to be. But when they start vocalizing it, it starts to pull things into reality for them in real time. And they're like, and then all of a sudden they start asking questions. Remember when I first asked, do you have any questions? And their heads are no. When they start vocalizing that brief back, all of a sudden the questions start coming out. Well, what about this? And what about that? And it's like, those are the questions I was looking for at the beginning. But if you're a leader and you're just taking that first answer, that nope, I have no questions, as the final response, and you're not probing a little bit.
Not good.
And, it's that concept, trust but verify. Yeah, I trust that you tell me that you don't have any questions, but I'm going to verify that you don't, right? And that verification part is done easily by a brief back. And we do this in the military. When we went out on missions, we would brief the mission, and then and it would go both ways. So before a mission, I would go into the Tactical Operations Center, as the squad leader and convoy leader, and I would go in and I would hear the briefing, and then I would brief back to my commander my part in the mission, and he would add any clarity, and I would ask questions, same thing, and then I would go once we wrapped up at the talk, I would go out to my truck and pull out my map on the hood of my Humvee, pull my whole squad around the truck, and I would give my briefing on what our section's task was, and then I'd have them brief back me to make sure that they understand their part in the mission, right?
Yep.
So this brief back, it's a cyclical event that happens up and down the chain of command, right?
Yep.
And then my
all
team
culminating in the commander's intent.
Absolutely. Yep. And that is the easiest way to keep things simple. in keeping with the chapter here, keep things simple, but also ensuring that everyone, because like I said, no matter how simple it may be, if it's not understood or not understood well, then that simplicity goes out the window, and it becomes complex very quickly.
One of the things that I find in business in general, right, is a lot of times, and it's so simple. Keeping with the theme here, is folks don't even understand the commander's intent of what's going on in their company.
Right.
On day-to-day operations, or like why, and it's really simple. It's really a simple thing, is basically what is the intent of what we're doing here. It really comes down to that. So simple. But yet that's not conveyed, often not conveyed in business. And yeah, it's like, our objective is to sell freaking widgets.
Right.
Yeah, but that's not the commander's intent. Like, what it comes down to is, you have to parse it down deeper, right?
Yep.
To get employees, simplify it for them so they come in and do their jobs more effective.
Right.
Because, we're selling widgets is just too broad. Like, get down to like what their job has to. So it's giving them commander's intent, giving them the overarching picture of their piece of the pie.
Yeah,
and that usually a lot of times simplifies people's day-to-day lives at a job. Period, because they have that kind of thing to hold on to, right?
And I think, those of us who served in the military, we often, again, we talk to transitioning veterans all the time, and one of the biggest challenges in transition is that idea of finding a bigger purpose or finding something to belong to that's bigger than oneself. And it's easy to find that in the military, right? Because you're in the military, you're serving the nation, you're protecting the country. It's a sacrifice of time. It's a sacrifice of self. It's a sacrifice of all of these things. You could clearly identify with those.
But let's be candid, though. It's a simplified life if you do it correctly, because you're living the commander's intent.
Right.
I mean,
absolutely.
And that's really simple, an oversimplistic way of looking at it. But if you live your life in the military, especially mission to mission, life's easy.
Right.
To an extent. Like, you don't have to think about a lot, right?
Yeah.
And you can do that in your daily life too. Just look at life as a set of missions. And yeah, man, I don't know. I just always look for the simple way to do it, but simple doesn't always mean easy.
Break it down into smaller building blocks, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just pieces of the puzzle, and you've got to, building blocks to building. It's, what is it? Brick by brick, my friend. You freaking got to build it up like that, and keep it simple. And we go into this one of the next chapters. What is the?
Well, next week we're talking chapter 7, which is prioritize and execute.
And this is what we're talking about right now. We're kind of leading into the prioritize and execute. Is that,
and chapter 8 is decentralized command.
And prioritizing and executing is all about simplifying too.
That's right.
Totally, it's correlated. I mean, it's amazing how they put this book together, right? So they just build upon themselves. The ego builds upon the everything. It's freaking crazy. Yep. So simplicity into the execution, and it's blows your mind a little bit. At least it did mine. So it's all stuff that we know, but it's compartmentalizing it and using it as building blocks to just become more effective leaders,
right? And
more effective humans, frankly.
Yeah,
I love it.
So go pick up the book unfuck yourself and start getting reading on that. And
shit.
And we'll be back next week to talk about the next 2 chapters. And we're working on bringing on a couple of guests. We're not going to do a whole lot of guests, I don't think, but we're going to bring on ones that we feel will add value to this discussion.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily famous people by any stretch of the imagination, but they're people doing cool shit. So.
Cool shit. I like cool shit. Cool. Good talk, my friend, and have yourself a fabulous 4th of July. Don't blow off any fingers, huh?
Nope. Hopefully not.
All right.
All right, bro.
All right, man.
Take care.
Peace.